Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister spent very little time talking about the actual report and most of his time boasting about the great financial management of the new government. I would start with the last statement that the Minister made, that Moody's has elevated Trinidad and Tobago's outlook from negative to stable. What the Minister did not say is that when the UNC came into office, Trinidad and Tobago's outlook was already stable, and they sent it negative in December 2025. Moody's revised Trinidad and Tobago's outlook from stable to negative. So that all that has happened is that we are back in the same place that we were in May of 2025. And why are we back in the same place? The Minister said that the elevation, I don't understand what that means, because he sent us negative, we now come back stable, is due to the great fiscal and financial management of the UNC government. That is simply not true. I have in my possession the rating action from Moody's, dated 12 June 2026. And it reads as follows. The change in outlook to stable from negative reflects improved near-term external prospects driven by higher projected oil and gas prices. That's all it is. America decided to attack Iran together with Israel. Oil prices went up. And as a result of oil prices going up and the uncertainty of that particular war, the prediction for enhanced revenues caused by the war has led Moody's to upgrade or revise, not even upgrade because the credit rating remains the same. Now, let's look at the situation with respect to what's happening in the world, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I did not say a word when the Minister, I was quiet. As soon as I've started to speak, the usual suspects have started to mutter. Or purchase, Sama Barata. Mr. Speaker, could I ask your protection, please?
I was very quiet.
Well, uncharacteristically quiet. So let's accord him the same measure of quietude, please.
Mr. Speaker, that's the second time you say that in 2 days, you know. And soon it will be characteristically. So, Mr. Speaker, let's look at the situation in the world. Let's look at the globe in, Mr. Speaker, what was that? You just talked to them. I'm asking you again to control them.
Rising to that level, come on. People have contributed in, yes, much louder, but please allow the member to continue in some quietude, please, please.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Let's look at what was happening in the world before the attack on Iran. What did the U.S. Energy Information Administration predict for the price of oil in 2025? The prediction at the end of 2025, quarter 4, this is the foremost forecasting agency in the world for oil and gas prices. They predicted that for 2025 and 2026, oil prices would be in the $60 range, Mr. Speaker. The $60 range. What are they saying now? Because the Strait of Hormuz is now blockaded, because tankers are not getting through, because 20% of the world's oil goes through that particular strait. Oil prices have risen to $90, $95, and what the US EIA is telling us is that it expects for 2026 that oil will reach $95, Mr. Speaker. So it has nothing to do with the UNC. I'm glad for the country. I mean, I'm not glad for the people in the Middle East. I can't be. But I'm glad for the country that a war that broke out in the Middle East will help us to get increased revenues. But let's look at the numbers the minister quoted. He claims that the increase in revenue will be $381 million. I'm a little surprised at that. I suspect he's understating the numbers deliberately. But let's use his numbers, Mr. Speaker. The minister claims that the fiscal deficit will rise from the $3.8 billion that he announced in October, which all of us said was nonsense, impossible. He claims that the fiscal deficit will now rise from $3.8 billion to $7 billion, Mr. Speaker. We told him that in October of 2025. I noticed at the beginning the minister attempted to be a seer man and predicted what I would say in this debate, Mr. Speaker, that I will come today and say that, Mr. Speaker, now St. Augustine is joining in. Will come today, that I will come today and say that a supplementation bill is abnormal. That's not what's abnormal, Mr. Speaker. What's abnormal is that a government cooks the books, projects a false deficit, knowing fully well that they have to come back later in the year and supplement the appropriation by billions of dollars. That is abnormal. That is abnormal. And the minister is now confessing that the deficit this year will be at least $7 billion. I suspect it will be more, Mr. Speaker. I suspect. Because the non-energy sector is simply not generating the revenue that it should. The non-energy sector, contrary to everything the minister said, the minister told us all sorts of things. He said that this government is laying the foundation for economic resilience. This government, we have reversed decades of mismanagement. That is not what the data is telling us. When you go and check the central bank reports, the economic data pack that is now being published every 3 months, when you go and check the review of the economy published in 2025, what are we seeing, Mr. Speaker? We are seeing this, that the index of retail sales fell year on year in fiscal 2025, a third straight negative quarter. Cement sales dropped to 92,000 tons by the end of 2025, the weakest in the series, confirming the construction slowdown. I am quoting from the central bank's own data packs of March 2026. This is what they are saying. Retail sales are down. Cement sales are down. Construction has slowed down, Mr. Speaker. And what you are seeing is a contraction in the non-energy sector, Mr. Speaker. You have a situation where the non-energy sector is contracting by as much as 10%, Mr. Speaker. So all this old talk. If that war did not occur in Iran, what will be the government telling us today? They'll probably be telling us to be a deficit of $20 billion in fiscal 2026. They'll probably be telling us that they can't manage. They'll probably be telling us they come to impose new taxes, Mr. Speaker. And you see, it's easy to talk, but when you go through the numbers, when you look at the Moody's report, you see that the worst performing sector of our economy, which was the best performing sector of our economy under the PNM, is the non-energy sector, Mr. Speaker. The worst performing sector of our economy is the non-energy sector. Credit and money are decelerating. I'm reading again from the central bank report. Private sector growth is slowing. It slowed from 8% to 5%. The local equity market, which is an indication of confidence in the economy, the stock exchange, The stock exchange has dropped 12.5% in total value year on year under them, Mr. Speaker. Look at bank shares. Look at shares of conglomerates. Look at shares of manufacturing companies. They have all collapsed under this government over the last 12 months, Mr. Speaker. These are facts that I noticed the minister did not talk about that credit growth has slowed down, that non-energy sector has collapsed, that the stock exchange has collapsed, Mr. Speaker, and all of us who have shares, I don't know if you have any shares, Mr. Speaker, would have seen the loss in value of our portfolios over the last 12 months under this government. Look at foreign reserves. Foreign reserves have dropped to 4.7 billion towards the end of the year, Mr. Speaker. They had a little bump when they went on the international market and raised $1 billion US in a bond, Mr. Speaker, but they have a payment coming up in August where they will have to pay $400 million US dollars. That will come out of our reserves, Mr. Speaker. It will depress our foreign reserves even more. Our reserves are now the lowest they have been for more than 15 years, Mr. Speaker. The import cover is now the lowest that it has been for more than 15 years, Mr. Speaker, under this administration. Under this administration. And let's look at what is happening with the Standing Finance Committee. What the minister said. This supplementation of appropriation is designed to boost productivity and to improve infrastructure and to maintain buildings like schools and so on, Mr. Speaker. That is not what is going on here. The supplementation of 2.9 billion, Mr. Speaker, 2 billion of that is for current transfers and subsidies. 570 million is transfers to statutory boards. And out of that $3 billion that we are talking about today, barely $400 million, Mr. Speaker, 20% is for goods and services and the development program. In fact, the development program is only being increased by $90 million. Out of $3 billion, the only way you can create economic stimulus, the only way you can deal with the terrible infrastructure that has found itself in this place over the last 12 months. I mean, potholes everywhere, bush everywhere, drains full of silt, rivers full of all sorts of things. Our deteriorating infrastructure can only be repaired through... Mr. Speaker, come on. I never said the minister was wicked. Look at what they say. Please control them, Mr. Speaker. Look, another one.
All right, continue. Members, let's get some quiet, please.
Mr. Speaker, out of that $3 billion, $92 million for development. Imagine that. 92 million. What percentage is 92 million of $3 billion, Mr. Speaker? I can tell you it's less than 5%. If you do the maths, 10% is 300 million, 5% is 150 million, so 92 million may be about 3%. 3 to 4% of this $3 billion for the development program, when they already are starving all of the P&M corporations of funds for the development program. And there's something curious in all of this. There's something very curious. During the budget, we pointed out that the Minister of Works and Infrastructure had not been allocated sufficient funds to even patch one pothole. We said that in October 2025, and what do they do now? They give them they give the whole government $92 million in development. There's something going on in this government. I don't know if it's some kind of jealousy that the member is put to act as Prime Minister, so the honourable member is being sabotaged. I don't expect the member to say anything. I don't expect them to say anything. But that has to be what is going on, Mr. Speaker. That has to be what is going on. So, Mr. Speaker, let me take a look at some of the more Mr. Speaker, let me take a look at some of the more astonishing things in this supplementation and variation. One of the most astonishing things was the fact that the Minister of Finance came with a lot of gusto, a lot of energy in October and announced the creation of an employment fund in the amount of $475 million. And this employment fund was supposed to, in some way, counteract the devastation that this government has unleashed on over 30,000 workers in CPEP, URP, reforestation, statutory authorities, ministries, and departments. That unemployment fund of $475 million was supposed to deal with that, even though it was inadequate. What have we seen? A whole 9 months has elapsed, and the excuse for not mobilizing that $475 million is that it required legislation. I asked the minister if he knew that when he made the statement in October. He said yes. I said, so how come 9 months later the honorable minister has not been able to bring simple legislation to the parliament to deal with this? And the answer was the usual, deflection. We do things properly. So doing things properly is putting $475 million in the budget to help poor people, and then not spending it and not helping poor people. That is how you do things properly. I don't know what is wrong with this particular minister, because we already have a law in the country, the Unemployment Levy Act, Chapter 7503, which simply allocates a portion of petroleum revenues to an unemployment fund. And then that is what was used throughout the years for the unemployment relief program, or special works as it was called. That's an act that has been in existence since 1970. You're going to tell me that having the model of the Unemployment Levy Act before you, 9 months later, you can't use that particular legislation as a basis to create an employment fund? 9 months later, with the brilliant Attorney General that they have now on their side. And we are told in the committee meeting that it is not going to be operationalized in this fiscal. So it will be 12 months creating this, I have to call it a slush fund, and not operationalizing it, making a false promise to people that certainly has not been kept. There are so many promises. The minister repeated that mantra. Promises made, promises kept. Well, you promised to spend $475 million dealing with unemployed people, and you have not kept that promise. And the excuse given is puerile. We do things properly. So it's taken us a year and more. It's taken us a year and more to simply copy and cut and paste and refashion and repurpose the Unemployment Levy Act, which creates the unemployment fund. A year to do that, Mr. Speaker. It is clear the intention never was to use that $475 million to employ people. The intention was just to put it there as a palliative and pretend that we care about people and we're going to help them, Mr. Speaker. But what else is inside of this supplementation of appropriation and variation? The 5 largest recipients account for roughly 70% of the total. $514 million to public utilities, driven almost entirely by a $376 million top-up for WASA. Now, where is the modernization and efficiency and transformation of WASA under the tenure of this administration? It is nowhere. It is absolutely nowhere. Because if they were in fact modernizing WASA, why would they need $376 million on top of the original allocation, taking the appropriation for WASA for this year to almost $2 billion? Energy and energy industries, fuel subsidy, $454 million. Health, $500 million. And what's interesting here is that of that $500 million for health, $386 million is in loan, principal, and interest payments. And I'm looking at some of the responses that we got here. And it just shows that, you know, this government not serious. They're not serious at all. We had asked what certain particulars with respect to the Ministry of Health And it's here in a response coming from the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Health. And the question was asked, the dates the loan were initiated, the duration of the loan, and the frequency of payment of principal and interest. And what's the answer? The UDCOT loan for $100 million, US $99.6 million, Arima Hospital. What was that? The loan was initiated in 2018. The duration of the loan is 10 years. That means it goes to 2028. And the frequency of payment of principal and interest is semi-annual. And since that is a loan that was guaranteed, Mr. Speaker, and since we have a cross-default clause in all of our loan agreements, that if the government or a statutory authority or state enterprise defaults on one loan, it calls repayment of every single loan that the government has. So it was inevitable that this UDCOT loan payment would have to be included in the 2026 appropriation. Another one, the Point Fortin Hospital. Again, the loan was initiated in 2021, refinanced in 2025. The duration was 4 years initially, then 5 years after refinancing, taking you to 2030. Therefore, that loan payment had to be in this year's appropriation. Sangre Grande Hospital, again, loan initiated in 2018, duration 10 years, takes you to 2028. So those loan payments had to be in this year's appropriation. Central Block, the loan was initiated in 2019, 11 years, taking it to 2030. Again, that had to be in this year's appropriation. And we pointed this out to the minister in October 2025. We told him, told the Honorable Minister, that he was cooking the books because he was not providing mandatory debt service payments. Eastern Regional Health Authority answer bank loan, upsized in March 2020 for 11 years, that takes you to 2031. That loan payment had to be in this year's appropriation. And I have just called out a few. Right throughout this supplementation and variation of appropriation, you see a series of loan payments that must be made. Must be made. It's either you pay off the loan and you don't have the money for that, and you accept penalties for early repayment, or you put it into the budget. Mr. Speaker, one of the most egregious actions of this government was to, I don't know the correct word to use, I don't want to be unparliamentary, was to snatch money that had been allocated for the Ministry of Housing to deal with critical payments, money that had been allocated to MTS to deal with critical payments, money that had been allocated to WASA to deal with critical payments, money that had been allocated. There were a series of loans dealing with overdue billings, dealing with payments, dealing with the requirement to continue our development program in this country, totaling $1.3 billion. What did the Minister of Finance do? He snatched every single loan, every single one of those special purpose loans, which were designed to deal with outstanding payments and critical infrastructure needs throughout the whole of Trinidad and Tobago in virtually every sector of infrastructure and maintenance. He snatched every one and converted all of those loans, special purpose loans, targeted loans, to deal with critical needs of this country, and used it to deal with his budgetary problem. Took the whole $1.3 billion and threw it in the consolidated fund to pay salaries, Mr. Speaker. A myopic move. And now you have the irony, the Minister of Finance having snatched all those, the proceeds of all those loans that are sitting in bank accounts associated with all the various state enterprises and statutory authorities to pay long outstanding commitments. You now have to put into this supplementation the money to pay these loans for which there will be no benefit whatsoever. No benefit whatsoever. That money is now no longer available to be used for MTS, to be used for UDCOT, to be used for WASA, to be used for any of the state enterprises, for NIDCO and so on, that were involved, for the Land Settlement Agency and so on, that were involved in the development of critical infrastructure in this country. But you see, the minister wouldn't tell you that. He wouldn't tell you that. He wouldn't tell you that he found himself in trouble towards the end of 2025 and had to take all this money. That was the solution they found. All of these special purpose loans designed to deal with long outstanding commitments. And you know, the bills are still there. They're still unpaid. The $1.3 billion in money for contractors and suppliers and so on still has to be paid. So more unemployment, Mr. Speaker, more pressure on small businesses, more pressure on small contractors, because these entities simply have no money. They're not paying. They can't pay, because this is what that $1.3 billion was for, Mr. Speaker. And that is the worst feature of this supplementation, when you see what's going on there, where they knew that they had to pay these loan payments. They knew what the loans were for. They snatched the loans, and now they have to put in the payment. So you're paying money for nothing. MTS is making loan payments for nothing. WASA is making loan payments for nothing, because they never got the benefit of the proceeds of these loans. And that is management UNC style, Mr. Speaker. Management UNC style. What else is inside of here? How can the supplementations inside of here drive the economy, Mr. Speaker? How? How? There's nothing for the productive sector. Nothing inside of here for the productive sector. Nothing to stimulate business. Nothing to stimulate employment. Nothing to help entrepreneurs. Nothing to help small businesses. And these, instead of the supplementation containing these kind of measures, measures to initiate business, measures to stabilize business, measures to deal with the deficit in the non-energy sector of the economy, instead of the supplementation dealing with that, all the supplementation deals with is personal expenditure, Mr. Speaker. It is completely contrary to the statements made by the minister opposite. Completely contrary. And let me tell you something, Mr. Speaker. You, I am sure, listen to the world news as I do. And you will see repeated efforts by the United States, the President of the United States in particular, to bring an end to the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz and bring an end to the hostilities in Iran, Mr. Speaker. And it appears, Mr. Speaker, that they appear to be, I don't know, it seems to me now that the parties appear to be getting to the point where in the relatively near future, that war will come to an end. And you could sign, but you know, you have to implement. So it appears in the very near future, the war is going to come to an end. What is going to happen, Mr. Speaker? We went from a glut of oil before the February 28th attack on Iran to a deficit of about 1 million barrels a day, I believe, is what it went from plus 2 billion barrels a day surplus to minus 1 million barrels of oil per day. And what is going to happen? As soon as those hostilities cease, the price of oil will just go right back down to where it was. As soon as production begins again, the price of natural gas will go right back there to where it was. And then the true weakness of the economic recipe of this hapless UNC government will be exposed, because no longer will there be any surplus revenues coming from the petroleum sector. No longer will that occur. And the structural weaknesses of the economy will then take over. The fact that they have destroyed our non-energy sector, Mr. Speaker. They have destroyed business confidence in this country. As I said before, one of the clearest signs of a destruction of confidence in the economy is the collapse of the local stock market. I mean, you have banks making profits hand over fist. You have Republic Bank posting billions of dollars in profits. You have all of these banks growing their revenues every year, and yet their share price is going down.
It again, unless you want to.
Of course. Time is Of course, I want the additional time. So we have a situation where these companies are making money. These companies are doing well, but their share price is collapsing. Why? Because people have no confidence in this economy. We now have capital flight because people are not investing in the local economy, and they're finding ways and means to get their funds overseas where they could have more stable and potentially safer investments, Mr. Speaker. I heard the minister with his mantra trying to explain away why they decided to scrap the Revenue Authority legislation, that the PNM crippled the Board of Inland Revenue by not providing staff. And the minister and all of them on that side know very well that it is not any minister who has any responsibility to hire a single public servant. That is the responsibility of the Public Service Commission. And when they were in government before, they failed at filling vacancies across the board in all ministries. They failed miserably. And they are going to do no better now. What has changed, Mr. Speaker, in the bureaucracy, in terms of the laborious procedures, in terms of the delays, in terms of how slow these institutions are, in terms of being able to accelerate the employment of public officers? Nothing. So that this pie-in-the-sky fantasy that they have, that they can modernize the Board of Inland Revenue, they can somehow transform a public service department that is dependent on the Public Service Commission for promotions and appointments overnight with the wave of a wand. It's not going to happen. It's just old talk, Mr. Speaker. Just old talk. And you know, the minister spoke about the Heritage Fund. But there is a report that $410 million US was withdrawn from that fund in fiscal 2025. And they're being very quiet about who withdrew that money, Mr. Speaker. Even the Auditor General's report does not tell you which administration withdrew that US $410 million in fiscal 2025. I would really like to know. And I see the minister said here, the supplementation is legitimate. It's tied to projects and programs where people can see the work of this government. What arrant nonsense. I just pointed out that only 92 million out of 3 billion is for projects and programs. 4% or 3% of the supplementation is dealing with projects and programs. Schools are being repaired. How? All the money gone from MTS, the minister snatched the loan, the $200 or $300 million loan we had for MTS to repair schools. Take the money and it's gone. Where is MTS going to get money from? Where? I don't see any significant appropriation or allocation for MTS in the original budget, Mr. Speaker. How are you doing it? Infrastructure upgraded with what money? When they give the minister works a couple dollars, a few shillings to repair roads, repair landslips and clean drains on rivers and so on. This is all pie in the sky fantasy. And Mr. Speaker, what is interesting about this particular administration is that they feel people stupid. You know, you're telling people that you're doing such wonderful things. I heard the Minister of Public Utilities say he repaired how much? 30,000 leaks? Where are these 30,000 leaks? They must be all in Cuba South, because they're not in my constituency. And Mr. Speaker, those who drive on Saddle Road into Santa Cruz, you might know somebody who does that, Mr. Speaker. We'll see a new leak appearing on Saddle Road every single day. Every single day. And there's a particular leak by Lynch Drive that has been repaired 8 times since May 25 to now. And it's burst out again, Mr. Speaker. So where is this infrastructure being upgraded? The minister said all over the country, infrastructure is being upgraded. I see they fix it again for the 9th time. The 9th time. And they pave over it for the 9th time. And we'll see whether it will last or not. And they said to us that we cannot comprehend a government that treats a budget without a plan. Or we cannot comprehend a government, them, that treats a budget as a plan. What plan are you talking about? Let's look at the budgetary arrangements. What have they done? They've introduced new taxes. They have double fines. In some cases, they have triple fines. They have punished people with a plethora, an avalanche, a tsunami of oppressive measures, Mr. Speaker. That is the plan. That is the plan. When we were in government, Mr. Speaker, we had a number of measures to facilitate the growth and development of small business. We had a particular loan program for small businesses where the government would guarantee 80% of the loan and give them concessionary rates and so on. I had to scrap that. That gone. So no longer is the Ministry of Finance supporting small businesses by way of a government guaranteed loan scheme. That done. That done. And Mr. Speaker, they're simply not paying them either. So how can all of these businesses survive? They already had the unexpected effect of COVID, Mr. Speaker. So many small businesses were struggling to survive after the attack on them from COVID. And the difference between us and them is that COVID came, and what did the PNM do? We supported everybody in this country. Supported everybody in this country. We supported all small businesses. We gave them assistance, Mr. Speaker. This government comes in, and apparently we can't comprehend their plan, because their plan is to punish everybody with additional taxes, additional fines, lack of payment, squeezing, retrenchment. Mr. Speaker, it is not, to me, it is no surprise that courts went out of business, you know. I'm not surprised, because when you retrench consumers, which is what it did, 30,000, 40,000 consumers were retrenched in 2025 by this administration. CPEP, URP, reforestation, state enterprises, statutory authorities, ministries, 30,000 to 40,000 consumers. And you're dealing with a particular group of people who have no disposable income after they pay their mandatory commitments for the month, after they pay the rent, after they pay the car loan, after they pay the hire purchase for the appliances and the furniture, and they buy food and they deal with their children and so on. They have very little disposable income left. But what they were doing, they were spending their money on consumer items, Mr. Speaker. When they get retrenched, what happened? They can't pay for their car anymore. They can't pay for their fridge and the stove anymore. So this is why so many small businesses have closed down over the last 12 months, because that is the government's plan. That's the government's plan. And I cannot comprehend a government that has a plan to extract money from people, to retrench people, to punish people, and then expect the economy to grow. And standards, sorry, not courts. I apologize, it's not courts. Standards. Standards. I mean, something that had been in business for so long, standards. Standards had been in business for so long. That is what Mr. Sabga started off his business with standards, before he got the opportunity to acquire Macaroni Allston. Standards. And you're going to tell me after so many decades of an entity like that providing furniture and appliances to mostly poor people, that has shut down Gesso and gone, Mr. Speaker? That obviously is a decision that deals with the lack of confidence in the economy, Mr. Speaker. And even listening to the minister, I could tell what they're doing. They had planned to spend $34 billion by this time. They spent 31. They hold back $3 billion. What did the minister hold back that $3 billion for? What did he think would happen when you plan to spend $34 billion, but you spend 31? What did he think would happen when that $3 billion just disappeared and did not go into paying bills, into dealing with infrastructure, in dealing with all of the issues that we have in this country? And I heard the minister boast something about social programs. Let me see exactly what the minister said about social programs. I don't want to misquote him. He said that they have been able to ensure that all of the social programs were uninterrupted. Not true. We have had many complaints from pensioners that they're simply not getting their pension, their old age pension. They're not getting it. Totally untrue. Totally untrue. It is only under the PNM that every single public servant was paid on time. Everybody got a pension. Everybody got their public assistance. Only under the PNM. It is a feature of this administration that salaries are late. They're not paid at all. Pensions don't come. That is a feature of this administration. And you see, it's an extreme form of gaslighting, where you say what the opposite is. You say you're helping somebody when you're killing them, Mr. Speaker. That is what gaslighting is all about, Mr. Speaker. So this supplementation will do nothing for Trinidad and Tobago. It will do nothing. They went and they agreed to settle with various trade unions. They incurred liabilities in the, it's past $6 billion now I'm counting in terms of back pay, $6 billion in back pay, and maybe $700 million a year. And you see, all the talk they're talking there, all the talk they're talking. When you read the Moody's report, when you read the central bank data pack, what is happening with our public debt? The facts are there. Our debt is jumping from in the 70s, 75, 76% to in the 80s, 84, 85%. The international agencies are not stupid. They have recognized that under this administration, all the talk they talk about PNM borrowing, they have increased our debt to GDP ratio to 85%, an unheard of level in this country. 85% debt to GDP ratio. And in terms of debt service, all of the things that they are doing, do they really expect people to believe that you are reducing debt? You're reducing debt service when the debt only going up, the debt service only going up. The percentage of the budget that is spent on debt service is increasing every day. The percentage of the budget that is spent on salaries is increasing every day. How are we going to manage in this country, Mr. Speaker? You know, the last time we come in, we had to deal with a mess created by the last administration. I remember I came in as Minister of Finance, and the then governor of the central bank told me that unless we go quick and borrow $1 billion and put it into the consolidated fund, he's going to turn off the tap. I said, what do you mean by turn off the tap? He said he will stop honoring government checks because there was only sufficient money in the government's account at the central bank to run the country for 2 days. That is what we faced on the last occasion, Mr. Speaker. They maxed out the overdraft. When they came in, the overdraft was in credit. Overdraft was in credit. The current account had $6 billion in surplus. They managed to take that from plus $6 billion to minus $9 billion. That is what we faced. And we're seeing it again. This unexpected windfall from that conflict in the Middle East is not going to last. Because as I said, and we heard, the deal has been signed. You know why? Because affecting the popularity of the administration in the United States. Because it's creating inflation. When prices go up like that, affordability, that's all the American public are interested in. They are interested in inflation. And they're seeing the cost of living in America just skyrocketing, and the administration is becoming unpopular. So they have to deal with that. And when they deal with that, and oil prices go back down, and the price of gasoline go back down, and inflation go back down, we in Trinidad and Tobago, because of this government's myopia, because of their inability to understand the structure of this economy, because of their failure to do anything to stimulate the business sector in this country, crapple smoke we pipe, Mr. Speaker. But we have done it before. We have rescued this country before, and we will rescue this country again when we return to government in the very near future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.